Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if we can't get on because we need to take the edge off, then it's not a physical problem usually. Usually that's a mental or emotional problem. Now there's exceptions, and there's some horses that you just need to take the edge off, but it shouldn't be a habit. I don't think it should be a habit or something that you need to do pretty much every time, even for a young horse. Now, if they've had 2-3 weeks off and they're going to be fresh and stuff, well, yeah, you're going to do some groundwork. But a tired horse is not a well-trained horse. If they have to be tired before they start to think for you, then it's not a physical problem that you got. I think it's pretty important. Even when I'm starting them, I try to avoid getting them too tired. I don't want them to be tired.
In this episode of Beyond the Grid Adventures, we're going to be interviewing Mr. Ben Longwell of TrueWest Horsemanship. He's going to break down how beginners can start taking their first rides on horses. Without any further ado, you're in for a ride. This is Ben Longwell. He is the owner of TrueWest Horsemanship. He is an advocate for the horse. He is out there to get you onto your horse and ready to rock and roll. But enough from me. Let Ben Longwell explain it to you himself, because I'm probably not going to do it justice. Without further ado, Ben Longwell, TrueWest Horsemanship.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on. And basically, yeah, we work with horses and their people full time. We instruct a wide variety of unique educational clinics and experiences, and that we also take horses on for training on a limited basis, as well as continuing to build our extensive online video library. And we do all of this with the basic mission in mind that regardless of breed or discipline, we want to help people achieve more together with their horse. And those words there are real key: together and with their horse. So they get on the same page, they're communicating clearly, they understand one another, and they're developing the skills necessary to go and do whatever it is they want to do.
Okay. And you, just by you saying that you're trying to get people working with their horse and have that togetherness, implies that there is a time when people are with their horses and they're not together. Can you kind of elaborate upon that?
Absolutely. I think that happens probably more often than not, unfortunately. It's really easy for us as humans, for example, to not be present in the moment with our horse. We may be thinking more about the past, or more about the future, or more about different situations that are going on in our lives. And horses are quite unique in that they predominantly think about the moment that they're in, and really only dwell on the past as it pertains to the present moment and their experiences. And so we miss a lot of things when it comes to their subtle communication and the way that we could maybe meet their needs or answer their questions and head off trouble or head off distractions if we can be more in the moment with them. And that's just one example of a way that a person isn't really with their horse even when they are there physically. There's a lot of examples of that.
And so when you look at, let's say you're taking a brand new person who's never been on a horse. Let's say they're a little in over their head and they just bought a Mustang, and they're bringing in all of their baggage from the outside world, and they're trying to, like, quote unquote, tame a Mustang, to use a popular term. Like, what is that person going to have to give up in order to actually get together with that Mustang?
Wow, that's a great question. One of the keys there is in learning to communicate. There's many things that we could talk about, what they need to do or how they need to position themselves or use their tools or their body language around that horse to begin to communicate to the horse for specific things. But on the flip side, they also, as a beginner, they need to gain skills of understanding what the horse is communicating to them. And without taking the time and sort of just observing, they're going to miss a lot of communication that Mustang is putting out there. they're going to get themselves in trouble probably at some point because they've missed those signs. And so I think your question, what do they need to give up? Well, depending on what their expectations are, they might have to give up some of those expectations as far as time frame or certain, levels of achievement in a certain set of time or whatever it is, and actually take a step back and try to gain an understanding of the horse's psychology and the way they're communicating.
You said that they might have to give up expectation for goals of that horse, kind of like meeting a deadline, almost kind of like a corporate world. They're bringing that onto the horse. And you made me think of, what about the people who buy this Mustang and they actually don't set any goals for that horse, and they just bought it as a pet? Because we know that happens as well. Do you think that that's a disservice or a service to the horse?
That's a really good question, and that's actually a two-sided question. So you have those folks who have done that and they don't have any goals, or if they do, it's on this extended time frame. This idea, okay, the principle is to take as long as it takes, and that's a good principle. But many times it's taken to the extreme, to the detriment of horse and rider, where progress is not really being made. You're on a plateau, and at best, things are going to be getting boring for that horse, maybe for the rider too. There might be frustration, being asked to do the same things over and over again, for no apparent reason, no purpose behind it. And I actually just wrote an article on this, purpose versus progress. And my question for the article was, why do those with a job for their horse often rush progress? And why do those without a job or a purpose for their horse tend to plateau or take too long to make any kind of progress? And there's those two extremes. And I guess that's exactly what you've just summed up here, is tendencies between our own personalities and human temperaments to take these things to those two extremes. As far as doing the horse a disservice or a service, in terms of adopting a Mustang just for a pet, I think, if you don't want to ride it, if it never gets ridden, that's one thing, right? That might not be what you're into. That's not what you want to do, whatever, that's fine. But there's still a certain level of knowledge and understanding in the caretaking of that horse and meeting their needs and even being safe yourself around it, which is the most important, that is going to be pretty key in that process and in having that animal as a pet per se. They don't make the best pets for that very reason. It's a little bit higher maintenance, a little bit higher level of commitment and understanding that's required.
Right. And you trying to think, if somebody were to buy a Mustang just as a pet, it's not like a dog, right? You can't just leave it in the house. You still have to have a level of caring for it. And do you have any resources that people, like, could you point somebody to those resources for caring for a wild Mustang?
Well, I could certainly start. Absolutely. I started a wild stallion a number of years ago, and I've got a series of short videos on YouTube that sort of documented that in a real basic way. Even more than that, one resource that I point people to constantly is on my online video library. The Groundwork series enables people to be able to start to communicate and understand their own communication, or what it can look like towards the horse through their body language. And it involves, effectiveness there involves not just getting a horse to move or circle or face up or whatever it is. It's actually much more than that. When we understand what we're dealing with in terms of the horse as a herd animal and as a prey animal, staying safe through the movement of their feet, we gain the ability to direct their feet, and through that develop this rapport and this connection with them. So again, for a horse that might not ever be ridden, these things are just key ways of us staying safe around them and also helping them feel safe around us. To say nothing of the practical side of just being able to deal with an animal of that size.
Right. And you've obviously, like, you're talking about this thing called groundwork. And we're focused on getting beginners out into the outdoors. So if a brand new beginner gets into the world of horsemanship, let's say they want to go hunting and they decide they're going to be a packer one day, which you should probably get somebody to teach you how to do. But what is this idea of groundwork? Because I know when I first started in the horsemanship world that I had no idea. I thought you just got on and went.
And I think that that's kind of a common thought among a lot of different people as they're coming into this world or getting involved with horses. Groundwork, to me, first of all, it's multifaceted. It is not just one thing, and it's not just a series of maneuvers. And I alluded to that a minute ago. But basically, anything that we're doing on the ground could be considered groundwork. It's not just asking our horses to move around us or to perform specific maneuvers, although that can be part of it. Basically, anything that we're doing with them on the ground. So that involves leading, that might involve, grooming them, picking their feet out, whatever it might be, getting them saddled up, all those sorts of things where we're on the ground. But in essence, it's the beginning of our conversation. When we step out the door, we got a halter in our hand, we're going to go catch our horse. The conversation has begun. And really that conversation carries on. It's a dialogue, like any good conversation needs to be, that carries on through our whole time with that horse, whether on the ground or in the saddle. And we want to be able to communicate our ideas to that horse. We also want to be able to take their feedback and understand what they're thinking and feeling and read them so that we can have this dialogue. The way I break it down for me, starting out on the ground, is I try to help people understand the two main modes of communication that we're going to use, and that being our body language, which I call the indirect feel, and our halter. In the case of groundwork, we might have a rope halter and a lead, that being the direct feel, so a contact that's physical right there to their head. And I break down body language, first of all, pretty thoroughly, because I feel like it's another catchword that we kind of hear a lot thrown around out there in this world. And it's kind of an abstract term if we don't define it. And so I always define it, and I quantify it so that people can understand what it is we're actually talking about. So body language to me is position, life or energy, and space. And so basically understanding how we position ourselves around the animal, and particularly how we direct our intention, where we might square our shoulders away to, is part of our position. That can have a huge effect on the ideas that we're able to present to the horse. The amount of life or energy in our body, not in our flag, not in a stick and string, not in a dressage whip, not in these tools. Not that there's anything wrong with those tools if we need them to stay safe or effective, but the actual life or energy in our body, movement and noise, and especially rhythm in that movement, because horses move with rhythm and they know what it means to be in sync with one another. There's a whole lot I could go into there, but briefly then, space on the ground, our space and their space interacting is that third element of body language. Their awareness of our space is what's going to help keep us safer on the ground. And they're very, very spatially aware animals. What happens when horses are not aware of us, or people say they're disrespectful? I don't think they're disrespectful. I think they're just not aware of our space, and it's up to us to help them become aware of us. And when they are, we're safer, and they understand that, and they take that as part of that leadership that we're trying to portray to them. So basically, the indirect feel, the body language, the direct feel, the halter. What is the direct feel for? And so we dive into that, and I try to help people understand that as humans, we get really handsy. We tend to do a lot with our hands, and we tend to capitalize on the use of our opposable thumbs all the time. And what I try to get people to understand is that the tools that we put on their head are primarily to ask them to soften or flex at the pole or the top of the spine, where their skull connects to their spine. When they're yielding thoughtfully and willingly there, then that tool can accomplish the purposes that we aim to have for it, including, steering, stopping, tying up, leading, all these sorts of things that we might do with that tool in our hands. If that horse is braced in the pole, against the feel of that halter or a bridle or anything else we'd put on his head, then we're going to have conflict or resistance in our communication through that tool. And so in a nutshell, again, that was a really short synopsis, but groundwork begins to take shape as we ask our horse to move in certain ways, to change directions, to change speeds, and we're communicating things that they know how to do. We're just showing them how it is we are going to ask them to do those things. And we're trying to assess their level of understanding and their willingness to cooperate and go along with us on those things.
You kind of just opened up a big can of worms for whoever's listening to this, because the audience that we have is not necessarily horse focused, but I think what you're trying to say, and I'll try and give this to somebody in like a 30-second spiel, is that your body language matters, and everything that you do has a meaning to that horse. Whether it's the halter, whether it's the saddle, whether it's you even just looking at the horse, that says something to them. And my question to you is, I'm always curious as to how our relationship, that communication that we have to horses, translates into like the human world, human interactions. If you could kind of elaborate upon similarities and differences between how we interact as people with horses and with other people, that'd be great.
Humans use body language in communication all the time. There's some statistics that even say the majority of our communication as humans is actually nonverbal, even though most of us tend to think mostly of what we're saying over anything else in our communication. The reason for that is that it's not conscious. So subconsciously, we're using our facial expressions and our hands, the way we stand, the way we sit, the way we nod our head, or whatever it is, to help get our idea across as we're speaking, or even sometimes when we're not speaking. Other times you'll see where people might say something with their mouth, but the body language doesn't add up. In other words, they're not being congruent. And it's an interesting thing about horses is that horses are congruent. And if you learn to look and see what you're looking at when you look at a horse and what they're showing you in their body language, that is pretty much the way the horse is thinking and feeling. They're not incongruent like a human can be. They might be stoic. They might be trying to cover things up just because they're a prey animal and they're trying to be stoic. But other than that, they are, what you see is what you get. And so there's a lot of differences between horses and humans in that regard. I think in general, it's interesting to me just to watch people interact, and as I interact with people, to observe their different temperaments coming out in the way their body language is portrayed. You can see confidence, you can see timidity, you can see portrayed confidence, but inner lack of security through body language and the way they face or direct themselves, or how, where their eyes look, or whether they can hold your eye contact or whatever it is. There's 100 different ways, but those are just some thoughts that come to mind when you ask that question.
And you're saying that horses they pick up, for one, on our subconscious body language. And so you have to learn how to conscientiously control your body language. So you have to get a better self-awareness in order to actually communicate with the animal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the biggest areas I see this, and it's common across the board with even more experienced horse people, but if we're speaking to an audience that would be mostly beginners into the horse world, it's extremely easy to back away from a horse. You might be standing there, on the ground holding the lead rope, and they move towards you, maybe to sniff you or to rub on you or whatever it is. It's very easy for a person to back their feet up at that point. Another really common place that happens is maybe I'm having you try to start to get that horse to circle around you. And it's very, very easy to draw that horse into movement by backing away from him and trying to shape up a circle from there. What happens though is, as you're backing away, as you're yielding ground to that horse, that does not speak confidence and leadership to the horse. It basically says to them that you're not too sure. You don't know if you're sure you can move them around, and you're subconsciously, you're reacting to their size and physical superiority. And again, when we're trying to portray leadership and confidence to them without even realizing it, most people will back their feet up away from that horse, and they don't realize it, and they don't realize how it could be compromising their partnership that they're trying to develop.
And anybody who, I would say, if you start backing up even in like day-to-day life, when somebody comes and challenges what you believe, obviously there's a reason that we should be open-minded and stuff. But at the end of the day, if you just roll over and you give ground to people, they're going to take and take. And I've seen that with horses before as well, where you start to back up. Next thing you know, you have a big problem on your hands. That might be a big problem for a beginner. They get, let's say the Mustang example, they get this Mustang that's not used to a human pushing them around. And next thing you know, they're on top of you.
Well, I was just going to say, I often say this to my students. If you think about it, you know, to have a prey animal, one of the chief prey animals or examples of what we would call a prey animal, you know, running over us, the apex predator, is a pretty unnatural situation. There's definitely, you know, something missing or broken in that interaction. And we are the ones that are responsible for that.
Right. And what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody to make sure that they don't get ran over when they go buy their first horse? Like one practical piece. Forget all of the science of natural horsemanship, true horsemanship. Just get straight down to practicality. Like, what is going to save your life?
That's a good question. And of course, it could depend on the horse, because, you know, that Mustang is probably not going to come anywhere near you. But if you've got a, you know, one that was orphaned as a foal and bottle raised, boy, you better watch out. You know, you're gonna get run over. Like I said a bit ago, their awareness of your space is crucial. And so whenever I am around a horse that I've never been around before, I just interact with all of them in generally the same exact way. Obviously, it's adapted to each one as an individual, but they are aware of my space because I'm aware of my space. And if that horse is even the slightest bit crowding me or pushing me or swinging his head through where my head is, I'm going to make my space, my bubble, I'm going to make it uncomfortable for him to cohabitate in my bubble. And what I mean by that is I might start to flap my arms. I might stomp my feet. I might start making some noise and movement that's kind of fractious. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to let him decide to live somewhere else a little bit. So I want to see him move his feet to reposition himself out of my space. Now, when I start to do that, if he's close enough to me, like he's leaned in on me or he's bumped into my shoulder or my elbow or whatever, I'm going to get prickly. I will go ahead and poke him a little bit with my fingers or what have you. But whatever it looks like, I'm going to make it uncomfortable enough for him to change his mind. I'm not going to push on him physically. I'm not going to drag on the halter physically. I want to do something that causes him to think something different. Another example would be when he moves his feet. He moves a foot in towards my foot. I'll see that coming and I'll move my foot away. Some of the folks who are listening might find that that's when they get their foot stepped on. But if you can catch it, just let him run the edge of his cornet band right above the hoof into the edge of your boot. In other words, it's just uncomfortable for you to put your foot there because that's where my foot was. And you just let him experience that and decide what he's going to do about it. And he'll eventually move off. He'll get out of your space. So these are just ways where I'm trying to get him to change the way he thinks about a person's space rather than me getting physical with him, because even though that can work on the outside where we might push a horse away and he moves away, we didn't change his idea or his understanding about our space. And so what happens is it keeps happening. He just keeps coming on back. But if we do something that changes the way he thinks about it and he moves himself out of our space, he'll start to do things differently because he's thinking differently about it.
And I would appreciate it if you could be really clear here. What do you mean by prickly? Because I've seen people who either one, let the horse smother them, or two, they take it to the extreme and now they're beating on a horse, and we obviously don't want that. But I think that a good definition of prickly would be called for here.
Okay. As gentle as possible, but as firm as necessary.
Okay.
Okay.
There's some horses won't take much, and most of them it shouldn't take too much. Whether that's, one poke with a finger or a couple of jabs with all 4 or 5 fingers, or more. But most of the time it won't be more than that.
So I've heard my horsemanship mentor, his name is Travis Elliston. He's down in Arizona. So he takes the horse and he will tap on the horse in a rhythmic fashion. And he says that it allows that horse to kind of click. And he starts to get it. Like, hey, I need to actually move away from this person instead of crowding him, because I guess he's almost working on the same level of communication as them. It's just like a little tip.
What I would do with that, or my thought along those lines is, and this involves not, like you say, not just about our space, but in movement in general, is what I mentioned about rhythm in our life or the movement of our bodies. So I will use my feet and the sounds of my footfalls to help communicate to them what it is I'm looking for. In other words, when I have them in a walk, I'm walking. And when I have them in a trot, I pick up a little bit of a trot, a more bouncy step, a little quicker 2-beat gait there. And then when I want them to lope or canter, I pick up kind of a 3-beat gait, almost a skip sometimes, if they're working free in the round pen, for instance, or something. And then going back to the idea of space, like if they're in my space and I'm kind of feel like I'm being crowded or run over, and I pick up some life in my body language and flap my arms a bit, stomp my feet, I'm gonna hit my feet to the ground pretty quick there, almost to give them that sense of urgency, much like they would when another horse's feet moves quick around them. They'll pay attention to that, and they might want to start to move their feet because they're herd animals. And so I think that's similar to what you're sharing there, is that rhythmic movement and sound that ties into the way they're using their feet and the idea that they need to move their feet.
Yeah, it was just a thought that popped into my head from a long time ago. Something that, as we've been talking, has been kind of on my mind. So I had a dinner with Joe Walter. Do you know who Joe Walter is? So I was at dinner with Joe Walter, and he told me when he was at the 4-6s and he was starting colts, he discovered that one of the best things that he did was he learned how to get the colt to the point where he would only have to do a few minutes of groundwork with it, and then he would jump on, because he wanted that colt to be as alive as possible when he was on top of it. What do you think about that?
Most colts, I like to get to the point where you can do less and less groundwork each day. Now that depends entirely on the colt as far as what he needs and how he's accepting of things and what all that looks like. But you go from the first few sessions being all groundwork and saddling and, all that kind of stuff to ideally by the time the person comes to ride with me and maybe take him home, maybe we wouldn't have to be doing any groundwork of a session, or just a couple of minutes every other day or something like that. So it does depend on the horse, and there's some that it's a better idea to kind of do a little bit, and the others of them I like to get to where it's minimal as much as possible.
Right. And I think one of the temptations people have is they want to just put their horses in the round pen and call it good. Put the horse in the round pen and then get on. Let them get their bucking out and kind of get that edge off of them. And I would suggest to beginners that eventually they should get to the point where they're living with that sort of edge, because that edge is going to allow that horse to connect things a little bit faster, or it's going to give them a little more pep in their step when it's time to pull an elk off of a mountain.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if we can't get on because we need to take the edge off, then it's not a physical problem usually. Usually that's a mental or emotional problem. Now there's exceptions, and there's some horses that you just need to take the edge off, but it shouldn't be a habit. I don't think it should be a habit or something that you need to do pretty much every time, even for a young horse. Now if they've had 2-3 weeks off and they're going to be fresh and stuff, well, yeah, you're going to do some groundwork. But a tired horse is not a well-trained horse. If they have to be tired before they start to think for you, then it's not a physical problem that you've got. I think it's pretty important. Even when I'm starting them, I try to avoid getting them too tired. I don't want them to be tired.
And one thing that just popped into my mind, so I was reading a book yesterday. It's called The Wild Palomino. It's a famous horse story. And one of the things that this kid did, this is kind of off subject, but there's an old saying that cow ponies, they would put the spade bit in their mouth, and then the only way to get that horse to stop is to let them, you basically take your reins off and you let them step into the reins, and it kind of tears up their mouth. My thought on that, and the reason why I bring it up, is because when you have a fresh horse, there's a lot of times that we're tempted to let them just blow up in the beginning. We're like, oh, they're going to figure it out themselves, and then we're going to deal with it. When in reality, there's probably a better way of handling it than just letting the horse tear up his mouth, or let the horse buck, or let the horse get into trouble and then you come and save it. In my mind, there's a better way than that.
Most of the time, I would say there is. They might need to buck, or they might need to go through something. But a lot of times we need to break it down into smaller steps, because learning happens right on the edge of that comfort zone. And the amount of exposure, it's pretty important that we measure it right there pretty well. We don't need to blow them apart or jump straight in the deep end or go to extremes, because the learning that's taking place there is not beneficial. If we stay well within the comfort zone, then we're probably not making progress. We're stuck on that plateau maybe that we talked about at the beginning. But progress and learning takes place just right on the edge of that comfort zone, as we kind of push on things and take them out there just a little bit, and then bring them back and show them the right answers to what it is we're dealing with.
And I would say that somebody who's trying to start adventuring for the first time. So we're big fans of getting people off their phones, getting people away from screens, getting people out of their cubicles. I call them the little cells. I'm a big fan of getting people away from that. And what I would like somebody that's listening to get from this is that we have to live almost on the edge of comfort. It's probably not going to feel comfortable to be on a 1,000-pound horse that you feel like might buck at any moment. If you were to do the wrong thing or press in the wrong spot. You catch my drift? Yeah. And when you teach your students, how do you get them to understand that being uncomfortable is okay? Because I'm pretty sure your clients range from like top level horsemen all the way down to the bottom. How do you get that bottom person to understand that it's okay that the horse is a little amped right now?
I try to help them understand and have knowledge about what's going on, and to realize that a horse is being a horse and that we shouldn't take it personally. You know, maybe they're amped, maybe they're not doing what we want them to. Maybe we're struggling to communicate something, and we feel like we're failing. And, there's a lot of those feelings that go along with what we're trying to deal with. And it's uncomfortable, and maybe we're scared, maybe we're frustrated. I guess what I try to help people understand is that that's part of the process, that's an inevitable part of the process of learning anything, really. Anything worthwhile is we're going to go through these feelings and these stages. And so I try to set people up to succeed, but I also know that there's got to be those experiences. And so I try to break it down, maybe have them do something more simple, have them recognize where the horse is coming from, why he's doing what he's doing, and how we might sort of mitigate that or change the environment with that. And then just set it up for that they could just accomplish something a little smaller. In other words, if they're trying to accomplish too much, they're trying to put too much together, how do we back that off and simplify it so that they, and also maybe the horse as well, can come through that and have accomplished something, maybe come into a better state of mind at the same time.
There's a saying in the military. If you didn't know, I'm in the military. So there's a saying in the military, and it came from this famous Navy admiral who says that you should make your bed every day. And the reason being is you start with a small victory so that you can build upon that. And your day is not going to be comfortable, but at the end of the day, you can always look back and say, hey, I accomplished this one thing with my horse, and I can build from that tomorrow. And you made your bed, which is always a great benefit. So make your bed. Now, do I make my bed every day? No, I don't. But I do try, and I have what's called a quiet time, where spend time with God and with the Lord, and I pray and I read my Bible. I try and do that every single day. And I feel like that's probably more important than making your bed. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, maybe you should find God. So Ben Longwell, let's kind of move away from the horses. Who is Ben Longwell? What do you believe? What's your story? Where are you from?
That's a good question. So I'm from Colorado originally. I grew up in a large family. And I always wanted to be a cowboy. It certainly hasn't looked like I thought it would or could. I married a New Zealander, and we actually started TrueWest Horsemanship originally in New Zealand. Ended up pastoring a church while we were down in New Zealand. Something that I didn't foresee, even though I had done a little bit of university work in a pastoral degree, and I'd always served in the local church with music and, youth ministry and different things. But essentially, I found myself with a bit of an identity crisis and realized that I somehow had allowed being a cowboy to supersede being a Christian or a follower of Christ. And it was a real struggle for me, because in New Zealand, there were no cowboys. There's no culture. There's no Western culture or tradition or anything down there. And it was lonely, it was hard in that regard. And I had to come to grips with the fact that, at that time we were called to pastor a church, and that being a follower of Jesus or my identity didn't need to be wrapped up in working with horses or being a cowboy or anything like that. And so that was an interesting journey for me, and something that I had to wrestle with quite a bit, to the point where before we moved back here, we were kind of in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And basically, I had to come to grips with the fact that I probably would never see this country again. I'd probably never see my family here in the States again. And I had to be okay with that. I had to surrender all of that. And interestingly, that was when the doors opened for us to be able to move back. But anyway, that's kind of, I don't know, a short story. There's a lot more to it, but does that help?
It's crazy that when you finally surrendered to God, he opened up the doors of America back to you so you could come be with your family. And I would just urge that whoever's listening, that you would open up the doors, that you would open up the door of your heart so that you surrender to God, because then he will open up doors for you. And even if he doesn't open up doors, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, like I know that I could die tomorrow and I'm saved. And I'm pretty sure you, Ben, feel the same way. So, Mr. Longwell, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming on to the Beyond the Grid Adventures with myself, Brevin Ingleson from Empty Spaces Outfitters. And if you haven't checked out TrueWest Horsemanship yet, like Mr. Longwell said, he has a large online library of more or less how-to videos, getting colts started. And take it from me, I've been around the block when it comes to horsemanship. It doesn't get any better than TrueWest Horsemanship, unless you're probably talking to Tom Dorrance himself or Buck Brandon. No matter where you are in horsemanship, no matter where you are in life, you need to find a mentor. You need to find somebody who's going to cut through the years of BS. That's going to allow you to have a good relationship with your horse just by the nature of them teaching you how to do it. If you don't do that, you're going to find yourself doing an actual disservice to the horse and a disservice to yourself, because at the end of the day, this goes for anything in life, really. If you don't have somebody teaching you how to do it, there's no need for that, especially in this day and age of mass information, where if I want to go figure out how to start a colt, I can do it right now with a snap of my fingers and a click of my mouse from TrueWest Horsemanship and his colt starting videos and stuff like that. Without further ado, thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure you go check out Ben Longwell at TrueWest Horsemanship. And also make sure you head on over to EmptySpacesOutfitters.com. We can get you some free books so that you can start your journey. Thank you so much for your time.